Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1246, 1246, September the 20th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy Sunday. Woo! Alrighty, so not a whole lot of new Spygate news to report, but there's a pretty important topic I want to focus on today because it's something that's going to come up here in the next couple of weeks. If in fact Stefan Halper does actually show up for that subpoena and answer any questions. We'll find out. But before I get into that, just to follow up on yesterday's story about Dana Rohrabacher taking a message to Julian Assange, offering him a deal on behalf of the president. Rohrabacher has now commented on that. He is vehemently denying that that is the case. He says there was no deal that he had worked out with the president, that he hadn't even spoken to the president. He went over there on his own volition, and he suggested to Assange that if Assange would give the name of whoever leaked that information to WikiLeaks, that possibly Rohrabacher said possibly that maybe that would help him to, not have to worry about being extradited back to the U.S. or whatever. So Rohrabacher was presenting it as a case of a sort of a option to Assange that if in fact he did this, that there could be some cooperation on the other end. Now, once he got whatever he could from Assange, then Rohrabacher was going to go back, and then he was going to have a meeting with the president. Say, okay, I spoke with Assange, and I said, hey, if you give up this, maybe something can be done. And at that point is when Rohrabacher was going to pitch Trump on the idea. But Rohrabacher says that he got back to the States and he made an appointment with Trump's chief of staff, and but that he wanted to have this appointment to make an appointment to speak with the president or the chief of staff, which was Kelly at the time, General Kelly, and he said he just never heard back. He was never contacted, and then of course in 2018. He loses his seat out there in California. He was winning on the night of the election, but after they harvested up some ballots, he ended up losing his seat. And so he no longer had any real political power or access to the president at all. But apparently he did come back from London. He did attempt to make an appointment with General Kelly, but he was never contacted back. And he vehemently denies that there was any deal that he offered on the president's behalf to Julian Assange. The attorneys on the other side of the argument are really not taking any issue with the statement. They don't think it's relevant, not worth arguing over. They have no evidence to argue the other way, but they don't have any interest in even pursuing the argument, to investigate it or anything else. It's just, to them, it's not worth arguing over. So that's why the statement was allowed to stand in the British court, is because the other attorneys arguing on the other side didn't think it was there was no there as far as didn't have any impact on the case they're making. So that is the where things stand right now as far as that accusation. So we'll see what happens. Now, I've talked a lot, especially recently. I've brought it back up again. I talked a lot about it about a little over a year ago, back really in 2017, a lot longer than a year ago, when Paul Wood wrote the article telling us about the multi-agency task force. And I said this is a key part of the information, because what we had up to that point was that the FBI having this hard and fast statement that they began the investigations into the Trump campaign on July 31st, 2016, Operation Crossfire Hurricane, and that prior to that, there was no activities. But we know that Stefan Halper was a confidential informant for the FBI during Crossfire Hurricane. But he was making contacts with Page and Flynn and Papadopoulos and others long before that. And so clearly he was working for somebody, and the FBI says it wasn't them. And that's why I've said the multi-agency task force is so important, because Apparently, Peter's been stroking us and possibly McCabe were part of the multi-agency task force. And by having the multi-agency task force out there doing these things, you can say, well, the FBI wasn't doing these things. No, because they were being done by the multi-agency task force, including people from the FBI, the DOD, Treasury, and other agencies. And so it seems like they've set up this multi-agency task force to conduct the illegal activities, to set the table for the activities that then could become quasi-legal. So this is what became apparent to me a long time ago. And this is why I said the multi-agency task force and understanding the role it played is so important. So hopefully this is being investigated and it provides an explanation. Because there has to be some explanation. We also know that from the recent testimony that was released from Joe Pientka, that when he was asked about confidential informants, he acknowledged that Halper, Christopher Steele, and Azra Turk were confidential informants for the FBI. But he also said there were others. When he was asked about naming them or how many of them, he would not do that. He would not say how many others. He just said there were others besides them. And he would not really name them. So, I think it's pretty obvious that Mifsud had to be one of those confidential informants. I don't know if Downer was a confidential informant. I think he was just kind of a last ditch. Halper was supposed to get Papaglopoulos to drop the ticking time bomb on him, but Papaglopoulos gets nervous, which makes Halper angry, because what happens is Papaglopoulos, as it turns out, instead of when Halper says to him, yeah, wouldn't it be great if the Russians did have dirt on Hillary? I mean, that would really help the campaign out. You guys certainly would be interested in reaching out to the Russians if they had dirt on Hillary, right? At which point, that's when Papaglopoulos says, no, that would be treason. We would never do anything like that. And we have the transcripts. It was being recorded. That's why Halper got mad, because that blew up Papaglopoulos. He just made a very strong exculpatory statement. And Azra Turk is sitting right there when he says it, the FBI informant, along with Halper. So Papaglopoulos makes this exculpatory statement, infuriates Halper. He gets up and leaves the table. Then, at sometime in that same period of time, you also had another person, a confidential informant, that we learned about later, which was an old friend of Papaglopoulos, someone he used to work with. They got to this guy, and they tried to get him to entrap Papaglopoulos with something he might say, but Papaglopoulos also made exculpatory statements to him as well. And then, of course, Downer comes into the picture. And he didn't follow official channels. That's why Nunes says there was no official intelligence. They had to try to take an unofficial set of collection of facts that were obtained unofficially, and then try to make them official. And this seems to be the whole purpose of the multi-agency task force, was to lay out all the ticking time bombs, and then once they were all laid and all the traps were laid, then they would transfer it over to the FBI, where they would just simply, all they'd have to do is blow up the traps, set them off. They'd all been laid. That's what appears to have happened to me. So we're just going to find out. But these are all the types of questions that should be asked of Stefan Halper. His role, if any, in the multi-agency task force. He should be asked if he knows Mifsud. He should be asked if he knows Downer. And of course, we know the answers to these questions already. And then there should be various digging into these questions. So, again, these are behind closed door hearings, so that's a bummer. And when they do release the transcripts, they'll probably be heavily redacted. So these hearings are not helping the public any. And as I said before, the Senate cannot charge anybody with crimes, indict anybody. So I don't know why they're doing these behind closed door hearings. I mean, these should be public hearings. But, again, the Senate Republicans are they're lame. I mean, they just are. And that's all we've got right now. We just have to hope Barr and Durham get it done and get it done right. So, just to try to go through this again on Halper and why he is such a key player. Because Halper has to know pretty much everything. Or a lot of things. He had to know the key things that were in play. The 4 FISA warrants on Carter Page. Halper was involved in all that. And had to know. I mean, he certainly had to know why he was doing what he was doing. As it relates to Carter Page. He had to know why he was doing what he was doing as it relates to Papadopoulos. I mean, he had the dinner with Papadopoulos for a reason. It was to extract the information that was dropped on Papadopoulos by Mifsud. So clearly Halper would have had to have known that the information had been dropped on Papadopoulos. And that would have come from Mifsud. He would have had to have called Halper or contacted Halper and said, okay, yeah, they brought Papadopoulos to England or to Italy. I met him. I had 2 meetings with him. And then I dropped the time bomb on him. He's loaded up and ready to go. That's when Halper goes and has dinner with him. Papadopoulos gets nervous about the pressure that Halper's bringing on him. He spouts out the exculpatory statement. Halper storms out of the restaurant, leaves behind Azra Turk. She attempts to try to get Papadopoulos drunk and take him up to a hotel room. He is not interested because he already realizes there's something bad wrong with this whole thing. Smells a rat. And then the next thing you know, Downer is brought in. To this day, Papadopoulos says he doesn't remember saying anything or even having a discussion about Russia or emails or anything else. But somehow, Downer walks away from the meeting and goes over to the U.S. Embassy and starts passing the information through there. It's very likely that Papadopoulos didn't say anything to Downer. But they probably told Downer, we don't really care. Go talk about the weather. We don't give a damn. Just go meet with Papadopoulos, and when you get done, go over to the embassy and tell him that he said this. We know he knows this because we planted it on him. So we know he's got the information. He didn't spit it out with Halper. That's okay. He doesn't need to spit it out. We'll just say he did. After all, you are a high-level international diplomat. He's a low-level guy in the Trump campaign who we're about to tie to Russia. So let's go through just a series of events that occurred before the opening of Crossfire Hurricane, at the period right at when they opened Crossfire Hurricane, and just after. All events involving Stefan Halper, who I think is probably the most key person that you want to get to testify and get the truth out of him, because he was involved in all of these things. I'd be 99% sure that he knew about Mifsud, that he knew about who put Mifsud in the game. After all, it may have been him, or his handler, or Mr. Gaeta. So in May 20th of 2016, May the 20th of 2016, Halper meets with Christopher Steele. Halper meeting with Steele. Steele working as a confidential informant for the FBI. Would be working as a confidential informant. At this time, according to the FBI, neither Steele... Well, Steele may have been by May 20th. That is about a week or so after Confusion GPS was hired. So this would have been very, very, very close to the time. It may have been just before or just after Steele is starting to go to work on his, or is beginning to present his information to his handler in FBI handler in Italy, Gaeta. In fact, I think it was June 20th. So this was a month before he presents his first report. So a month before he presents his first report, and just after, about a month after Confusion GPS is brought in, and it's somewhere in that period of time, in that gap of time, between May 20 and June 20, somewhere in there is when Steele is hired by, or brought in by Confusion GPS. And at some point around that same time, he becomes a paid informant for the FBI, because we know that on June the 20th, he gives his first report to his handler in Italy, and he's paid, or is promised payment at that meeting. So on May the 20th, 2016, right about the time that Halper is beginning to give reports and become an informant for the FBI, he has a meeting with Halper. Looks more and more like something I suspected a long time ago, is that Iggy may not have been a source for anything. That he's just a front. It may have been Halper all along that was feeding Steele. May 20th, 2016, Halper meets with Steele. Now this is supposedly 3 months before the FBI admits that Halper begins working for them. They say Halper didn't begin working for them until somewhere around August. But here he is meeting with Steele 3 months before that, at about the very same time that Steele was brought into Confusion GPS to so-called put together the dossier. This meeting took place in London. Now, on this exact same day, May 20th of 2016, where Halper is meeting with Christopher Steele, Steele's either just been brought in to Confusion GPS, or he's about to be brought in, somewhere in that, within a week of this. On that exact same day, Stefan Halper invites Stephen Miller, one of Trump's spokespeople, to come to London, to that very same symposium that Carter Page ended up showing up to. So it wasn't just Carter Page who was invited to that symposium so they could set him up. Stephen Miller was also invited on that exact same day. May 20th, 2016, Halper meets with Christopher Steele in London. That same day, Halper sends an invitation to Stephen Miller to attend this London symposium. Then we move a couple months ahead up to July the 6th. Halper makes contact with Carter Page. So he makes contact with Carter Page, has some conversation with him, and then Carter Page informs him that he's going to Russia, back to Russia, where he'd been doing a lot of work as a consultant, energy consultant, and he's going to be making a speech there, of which he did quite a bit. He made a lot of speeches over there regarding energy. So Page tells Halper, yeah, well, we should get together and talk. It sounds like you got a lot of information. You're a pretty fascinating person with a lot of information. And I'm going to be a foreign policy advisor, working as a foreign policy advisor. Am a foreign policy advisor for the Trump campaign. But I got to go over to Russia and make this speech. And but when I get back to the States, I'll contact you. So what happens is that Page goes and makes this speech in Russia. But then, instead of going back to the United States, he ends up going back to London, back to Cambridge. And it's about that time that Carter Page starts showing up in the so-called Christopher Steele dossier. So here's Halper having contact, and keep in mind, Stephen Miller declined that invitation to Cambridge, but Carter Page did not. So Page goes and does his speech in Russia. He's supposed to go back to the States, but instead he goes back to London, back to Cambridge, where this symposium is going to be held. And it's that same time period, the very week that Page comes back from Russia, goes to London to be at the symposium on the invitation of Halper, that we see Carter Page's name showing up in Christopher Steele's memos, which would suggest that it was Halper who was giving Carter Page, it was Halper who was obviously feeding Christopher Steele about Page, because it was Halper who was communicating with and in the process of setting up Page. And after that first meeting between Page and Halper, they exchange email addresses, and they are in regular email contact. And it's while Page goes to Russia that Halper sends him an email and says, hey, instead of going back to the States, why don't you come back to the symposium here in London? All expenses paid. I'll pay your travel. Come back here, pay for everything. Hotel, really nice hotel, buy all your meals, take care of your travel arrangements. Come back to London instead of going to the States, because I'm not going to be back in the States for a while. Give us a chance to talk some more at the symposium. Remember, all of this is happening before July of 2016. This is happening between July 6th and July, roughly somewhere 21st, 22nd. It's about a 2-week period of time that this is happening, what I'm describing right now. And another thing let's keep in mind is that the conversation that Peter's been stroking us and Lisa Page are having about Strzok asking Lisa Page if their Oconus lures have been approved, their overseas spies. That request, that conversation, Strzok asking Page if their Oconus lures have been approved, that email, that text rather, was in 2015. December of 2015. So in December of 2015, they're already discussing Oconus lures. Yet they say that their so-called informants never became active in the investigation until after they opened Crossfire Hurricane, and they say specifically with Halper, not until August. Yet here we are in the mid-spring of 2016. He's already engaged Flynn. He's already engaged Papagalopoulos. And now in July, early July, he's on to Carter Page. He also had reached out to Stephen Miller, at the same time that he reached out to Page. Now, while Page is in Russia for that week to give that speech, Halper has a private dinner with Madeleine Halfbright. Very, very, very close longtime friend of the Clintons. She served in the Bill Clinton administration. So while Page is over in Russia giving this speech, Halper is having dinner with Madeleine Halfbright and Vin Weber, hardcore anti-Trumper, including to this day. He's still a big hardcore anti-Trumper. Vin Weber is, of course, a neocon strategist, typically described usually as a Republican, but he's a neocon, and he gets along, has many close friends like Madeleine Halfbright who are neo-libs. On foreign policy, there is no difference between them. Also, we should mention Albright and Weber both served together at the Council on Foreign Relations. They're both CFR. So then Page comes back from London. He's there for a week. While he's there, Halper is having dinner with Albright and Weber. Then Page comes back to London. And of course, that's when Halper has Page come back to the symposium. All his expenses paid by Halper. And you know what Carter Page does after he comes back from London? Or comes back from Moscow and goes to London? Gets checked into his hotel. Exchanges a couple messages with Halper. Carter Page has a little dinner of his own. Guess who? Madeline Halfbright and Weber. Carter Page is back from Russia and has dinner with Albright and Weber. Then, in August, now the investigation is officially open, Halper goes back to the States. He's got a farm in Virginia. Page now is back in the States. Carter Page. Carter Page visits Halper at his Virginia home. Then, after that meeting, Halper goes to work on Sam Clovis, who is Papadopoulos' contact in the campaign. Then Halper, of course, sends out the invite to Papadopoulos, offering him $3,000 to come over to London and write a paper on energy. All expenses paid. Halper goes back to London. And he and Papadopoulos have dinner 2 times. The first of those dinner meetings is when Azra Turk is with Halper, where Papadopoulos makes the exculpatory statement. So you can see from these timeline of events that Halper, who the FBI admits was one of their informants, is involved before, during, and after with all the targets of the investigation. Somebody's got to explain that. And no one has at this point. So if you're interviewing Halper, that's what has to be understood. That's where you should drill down. That's why there should be public hearings. We have no idea what questions they're going to ask Halper. I could interview Halper for 4 hours and never ask a single question that would create any problems. Or I could interview Halper for 10 minutes and ask 5 questions that would hang him and everyone around him. I don't trust the Republicans in the Senate to ask the right questions. I don't expect them to do the homework, to put this little scenario together that I just laid out for you. This sequence of events that shows clearly Halper involved before, during, and after the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, clearly showing him involved with the very targets before, during, and after. Certainly having to know about the other informants that were dropping the ticking time bombs on these people so that he could detonate them. Halper had to know why he was doing what he was doing. He had to know when he got together with Papadopoulos to get the information off of him, he had to know that the information had been planted on him. You know what I mean? So these are the critical questions, and I have to assume that Durham's team has already thoroughly interviewed Halper. And man, there's a lot to talk about. If I was sitting down with Halper, the first 3 questions I would ask him is, do you know Joseph Mifsud? Do you know Downer? And we know the answer to that question. Were you working with one or both of these individuals in some type of a FBI operation? Were they involved in what you were doing, working as an informant for the FBI? I would love to hear him answer those 3 questions. Again, when you look at the timeline, the things that were happening, the times that were happening, And the reason I bring up this dinner that he has is that we still are looking for the contact that brought Downer into the game. We know that Downer goes all the way back to Bill Clinton's days when they both went to Oxford together. We know that Downer, while working as a high elected official in Australia, made major contributions to the Clinton Foundation of Australian taxpayer money. We know that he was hardcore anti-Trump and opposed to Trump's foreign policy and very much a neocon. We know that he spoke 2 times in 2016 at functions with Stefan Halper. We know that he serves on the board of Hackloot, this private intelligence cloak and dagger firm that's based, it's got several different offices around the world, but one of them is in London. There are too many coincidences here. Halper, an admitted confidential informant of the FBI, meeting with Christopher Steele, an admitted confidential informant for the FBI. But the first time they met would have been literally right at the time that Confusion GPS is just getting to Steele. It's either the week of, maybe the week before, maybe the week after. It's right in that point of time when we're told that Confusion GPS brings in Steele. Halper's already meeting with him. And they say, the FBI says that Halper was not working for them until August. This was happening in May. So both of these guys, Halper and Steele, would go on to be FBI informants 2 months or so after they have their first meeting, where they're already conducting these operations. Carter Page's name starts showing up in Steele's memos after he meets with Halper, who had just established communications with Carter Page. It's looking more and more like Halper was almost certainly, really, Christopher Steele's one of his primary sources. Clearly, Glenn Simpson had written the backstory from the work he had done back in 2007, writing those articles in the Wall Street Journal. He already had the backstory, which included Manafort and other people. He just had to plug in some different names and change the dates. Now he's got the background of the story. Then you bring in Halper and Steele, and they update and modify it and give us the new and improved version, the so-called Christopher Steele version. But the guy that appears to be generating the so-called new information appears to be Halper. Iggy ain't coming up with crap. I surely hope they ask the right questions. I have no confidence whatsoever in the Senate Republicans. I do have some confidence in Barr and Durham. I certainly hope I'm proven right. If you can't shake this monkey out of the tree, you're one hell of a shitty investigator. I'm not even a professional investigator, not anymore. I used to do skip tracing for a major department store. I worked in their legal department as a skip tracer. That doesn't make me a great investigator. Makes me a pretty damn good skip tracer, though. But, yeah, I know they got people a lot better than me. And if I can figure this out, they surely as hell can. We'll just keep watching. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be back when there's more news to report. See you. Bye.